Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phil and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to break down the very beginning of the season for the Baltimore Orioles and the Norfolk Tides as both teams got underway last week. After dropping Wednesday night's contest to the Boston Red Sox, the Orioles sitting with a 500 record at 3-3. They've yet to win two straight games, but they've also yet to lose two straight games. And so far, we've kind of seen a little bit of everything. We got a great start from Zach Eflin at the beginning of the season. A lot of runs have been scored in the Orioles, 3 wins. And in the 3 losses, we had one fairly high scoring affair that ended in defeat for the Orioles, and 2 games where the bats were kind of quiet. So we'll break a little bit of that down before we get into the Norfolk Tides, and then we'll wrap up with a discussion about Gunnar Henderson, who could be joining the team later this week. But starting with the major leagues, Bob, what have your thoughts about the Orioles been so far through 6 games?
Yeah, like you said, it's been a tale of 2 cities or two different teams. It seems like whenever Jorge Mateo's in the lineup, things haven't gone as well. I think it's just partly coincidence, partly because he's a black hole in the lineup. But yeah, we've either scored 10 runs or more or kind of fallen flat. Starting pitching, John Muley had a nice article about the starting pitching that was pretty much you can make of it whatever you want, because the ERA was terrible, the innings per start not great, but then the FIP and XFIP was way better. So it's so early in the season, there's really not much you can take away from it other than hopefully you keep putting in the runs and coming away with some wins until you can kind of settle in. I know Sugano was out with hand cramps from sweating so much. That's not a great sign when it's early April, late March when it happened. But yeah, got to get Gunnar Henderson back. Got to settle in. It's easy to forget that in 2023, I think we started out like 5-6 or something along those lines the first few weeks. So, I mean, I've been happy. It's been fun. The big games they showed up for the very first game of the season and then the home opener. So I'm just glad baseball's back and we get to argue about it for the next 6 months.
Yeah, this is like it's going to be like this all season. Like it is going to be a night by night war in this AL East division, and I think that we kind of touched on this with Connor when we did the prediction episode. And it's like this Yankees lineup is mashing right now. It is a very good team, even with their injuries, and we know they're one injury in that lineup away. If Judge goes down, could the rest of the lineup tumble? But right now, that lineup is clicking on all cylinders. The Blue Jays are going to be scrappy. This Red Sox team is very good, very, very good. The Rays are off to a great start. This is going to be a tough division. It's going to be a dogfight. And so it's just game by game. That's the only way I'm looking at this. And I've enjoyed this so far. Yeah, there's been some not so great moments. And some guys still in the roster right now that we wish weren't there. Pitching, of course, could be better. But, just taking this game by game, I've enjoyed having baseball that matters back, to be honest. So, yeah, we'll dive into what we like and what we don't like here in the very beginning. But overall, this is it's going to be a war. And it's going to be who's going to win the battle of attrition. We'll see who comes out on top of this. But it is not going to be easy this year in the AL East.
No, it's not. And we've seen a good reminder of that early on in the season. So first off, the Orioles get 7 straight games against American League East foes and the Blue Jays and the Red Sox that are running the gauntlet early in the season in that sense. And we've seen the injuries pile up. Gunnar Henderson got hurt in spring training. Colton Cowser gets hurt a few games into the season. He's going to be out a couple of months. So far, we've seen where some guys that you kind of viewed as depth pieces that were not going to be part of this team early in the season or not have to play a big part in this team early in the season, like Dylan Carlson and Jorge Mateo, now getting a little bit more game opportunity than you might think. And with Henderson possibly coming back this week, it seems like one of those 2 guys is going to go, but we'll have to see where that leads. I will say this for a positive, is that the offense is back in the mode it was in 2023 and the beginning of 2024. On the nights where they're clicking, they can come up with the big inning late to put away an opponent. They did that in both of their wins in Toronto. They did that in the home opener, and that really takes the burden off the bullpen. And yeah, the starting pitching's got to get better. I'm not going to deny that. It's not going to be sustainable to win 9-5 games night in and night out. But if you want to look for a sign that the offense might be clicking, it's that. It's that they're able to pile up these runs early. And I have to say, Jordan Westberg looks very good right now. Jackson Holliday, I think, looks much better at the plate than he did a year at the end of last season. So there are some encouraging developments in the lineup, even without Henderson there.
Yeah, I mean that Jackson Holiday home run, one was it like 108 to the opposite field gap was pretty spectacular. Also, was a great time when he was able to handle 97 above the strike zone and just smack it over second baseman's head for a single. So yeah, definitely love what Jackson Holiday's shown so far. And the bullpen, speaking of, I think has looked pretty good. I want to shout out a couple guys in particular. Brian Baker, my goodness, I think it's bacon season in Baltimore because the guy looks great. I guess all he had to do was change his grip on his changeup, and all of a sudden he's dotting fastballs on the corners. The changeup really does look nice. Gregory Soto, I think he looks electric out there, other than when he pitched back to back, which I thought was an interesting call this early in the season. Sir Anthony Dominguez proving that spring training numbers still meaningless, and Felix Bautista got back out there. Didn't get a save, I don't think, but he had a scoreless appearance in Toronto, striking out the side, and then struggled through a rough inning. But it's good to see him back out there, and getting that Adley hug on the home opener was cool.
Yeah, a lot of talk early on, a lot of comments on shows before the season started. Whenever we would try to be positive about this bullpen, people trying to bring the mood down about this bullpen, and they're performing extremely well so far. You mentioned Baker. I know he just pitched tonight, so we didn't have time to look up new numbers or anything, but Brian Baker had a 116 stuff plus on his fastball in that first outing, and the changeup and slider were 110. Like, phenomenal stuff from Baker. Matt Bowman stepping up. Love seeing that. He had a really good outing in Norfolk on their opening night and then got the call up to the major leagues. He's performed well so far. So really, outside of Ciano Perez, this bullpen's been really fun to watch, especially Gregory Soto. I've greatly enjoyed watching him. But, even Batista's outing the other day, like, that's the home opener. Like, that was electric. You can tell. I'm sure that was an emotional outing for him. I'm glad they had that big lead and they were let him just shake all that out, because the outing at Toronto was one thing. It's not in front of the home crowd, where clearly he loves Orioles fans. Orioles fans clearly love him. And so I'm sure that was a tough outing for him to get back out there on the mound, but he got through it. And so now Felix Bautista is going to be, Felix Bautista as he continues to warm up. So yeah, the bullpen, you could sit here and say, like, oh, well, the starters got to go deeper and they're going to, this bullpen's going to fall apart eventually. No, for right now, they're cooking, they're baking. Like, we're having a good time with this bullpen. I'm enjoying it.
And just so I don't leave him out, Yunier Cano also, I thought, has looked really good. He's only pitched in 2 games, but 3 strikeouts. Don't think he's given up a hit or a walk. So,
and let's go to Norfolk now. They've had a little bit of turnover since their season began on Friday with a loss against Durham. As you guys just touched on, Matt Bowman actually started the season with the Tides and was brought up. Dylan Carlson was with Norfolk initially and then has had to join the majors to fill in for Colton Cowser. And you look at the Tides record as of right now, as we're recording this on Wednesday night, they're sitting at 1-3, although they're up 2-1 against Charlotte in the top of the 8th as I speak. So it might be 2-3 by the end of the night. For the most part, a lot of the conversation around the Tides has been Gunnar Henderson's highlight reel home run off a light pole in Charlotte. That was very impressive. But for the players that are going to be staying in Norfolk, we've seen some highlights so far this season. And Nick, I'm going to start with you on Kyle Bronovitz, because you wrote up a piece over on our Substack about his outing on Tuesday night against Charlotte. And just to give a little bit of background, Bronovitz, before he had Tommy John surgery, was a guy who typically sat low 90s as his fastball, had to have his knuckle curve working effectively to really generate swings and misses. Last year, his first season back from Tommy John surgery, the stuff looked kind of the same, but you dug into the data on his start Tuesday night and saw something much different.
Much different. I mean, I think he had the velo last year when he was back in Bowie, but we don't have access to a lot of that good data when they're in AA or below. So it's been a lot of fun seeing these guys pitch in the AAA level so far, and we can really dive in. And yeah, like I don't care about a minor league team's record at all. I think they are completely irrelevant. All I'm concerned about are these individual performances, and the guys that matter are stepping up and performing well. And there are a couple of bats that we can talk about too, but it's not as bad as it looks on the surface with those guys. But with Branovich, yeah, it was. Let me pull it down here. This was low velo. I mean, by the time before surgery, when you watch a Kyle Branovich outing, you see that velo dip into the upper 80s by like the fourth, fifth inning. Obviously, that's not going to cut it. But now he's sitting 93 to 94. He's touching 96 miles per hour. He was up to 95.5 in that outing on Tuesday nights. He's up to 18 plus inches of induced vertical break on the fastball with 7 feet of extension. So, like, and you saw that. And this Charlotte team is no longer like the laughing stock that, remember last year when Norfolk exploded for like 20 something runs a game in that opening series against Charlotte. This Charlotte team is much better. You got guys like Greg Jones. I don't even have the roster in front of me right now. It's a much better lineup. And Branovich carved through him. Like 7 strikeouts across 4 innings pitched, just 1 hit or 1 walk, 14 whiffs. Like he looked really, really good. And it's just been weird because I didn't know what to think about Branovich or what the organization thought about him because he didn't get back to AAA last year, even though he was in AAA before Tommy John surgery. He doesn't get back last year. They just kept him in AA. So it's like if they kind of passed him over, but now like this isn't a guy who like the fastball at a 103 or 106 stuff plus on Tuesday night. Like the fastball is one of his strengths now, which is a pretty good sign for him.
Yeah, just to help you prove your point about the Charlotte lineup, I have it pulled up here. Greg Jones, Mike Talkman, Oscar Colas, Chase Meredith, Edgar Caro, Kyle Teal, Colson Montgomery, Bobby Dalbach, even from former Red Sox. So, yeah, definitely a different look from the Charlotte Knights this season. And Cameron Weston pitched pretty good tonight, too, by the way. 4 innings pitched, 6 strikeouts, only gave up a solo home run. But yeah, Branovich, he looks really, really good. And yeah, he looks like a completely different pitcher than he was when he first came over in that trade, where it was like, lower 90s fastball with a great curveball. Now it seems like he's going more slider heavy over the curveball, at least very early on. Slider, I think, had 44% whiff rate, which pretty darn good. I could see why you might want to go to it if you've developed something like that. So yeah, with the increased velocity, the new slider, and if he can still go back to his bread and butter every once in a while with that curveball, then yeah, he might have something. Might go back to where he thought it could be pre-surgery, where it was like a back end starter or at least a decent reliever. So love to see it, even if it's to work out a trade where he can get an opportunity somewhere else. I just love that in this day and age. That's like my favorite part of baseball right now is that you're never too old to develop a pitcher. You can just struggle and struggle and struggle, and then you learn a pitch or two or make a tweak in your sequencing, and all of a sudden you are back in the game. Like this is a completely different pitcher than Kyle Branovich was a couple of years ago, but here he is knocking on the door once more.
Branovich's 14 swings and misses on Tuesday night, by the way, were tied for third in all of AAA. And Bob, I'm glad that you mentioned Cameron Weston because that's where I was going to go next. He touched 95 a couple of times, or one time officially 95, but 94.8, 94.7, 94.6 on a few pitches. So we want to round that up. We could say that Weston hit 95 5 times on his start on Wednesday night. What we know about Weston from following him the last few years is that he's got a deep repertoire, locates it pretty well. Velocity has not necessarily been his strength, at least in the scouting reports. I'm wondering, is this a case where maybe the velocity has started to tick up a little bit and we're just now seeing it? Or is this a more recent development that we're finally seeing Weston start to add a couple miles per hour to that fastball? Either way, though, his stuff looks very good on Wednesday.
Yeah, just 3 hard hit balls allowed in this one. The one hit was a home run, but it was a first inning home run. Shake the nerves off. First AAA appearance. A lot of swing and miss there. Like, yeah, this looked really good for Weston. I think there were reports last year of the increased velo because he was finally healthy for the first time last year. Last year was the first full year we got from Cameron Weston where he was healthy the entire year, and you see how good he was. He was in the conversation there, I think, for Orioles minor league pitcher of the year. And so to come out tonight here against this good Charlotte team and pitch like he did, that was promising as well. It's, we're going to talk about the traffic jam of pitchers in the minor leagues with these minor league rosters. And so you haven't seen a lot of the bigger prospects kind of sneak their way through into Norfolk, but Cameron Weston did, and he showed up on night one. So good to see there. And other pitchers as well. The other night against Durham, like Justin Armbruster pitched well, 2 2/3 scoreless with 4 strikeouts. Fastball had a 111 stuff plus. Carlos Tavera was showcasing his stuff with 1 1/3 scoreless innings. And we got our first look at Raul Alcantara on the mound. He did walk 4 in 3 innings, but he struck out 7 and allowed just 1 hit. Heavy slider usage there. It's been a lot of fun watching these Norfolk guys start off the year on the mound.
Yeah, and Armbruster tonight, 2 more innings with scoreless with 3 strikeouts. So much better start to his year than 2024, to say the least. And
bullpen roll.
Yeah, looks pretty good in that role. Weston, yeah. Speaking of whiffs, like when we were talking with Branovich, his slider, Weston's had a 45% whiff rate as well. 35% altogether with all his pitches. Mix it up pretty evenly between sinker, slider, changeup. 40% sinker, 30% slider, 30% changeup. That's what he's going to do. And he's got more pitches in the bag than those 3. We know that. So, yeah, he's just going to junk it up there, mix things up. And it's not even junk when it's coming at you 95 miles per hour at this point. So, yeah, love what we're seeing from the pitching on the AAA level so far, for sure. Alcantara, yeah, that was even if he ends up going back to the relief role, it's just cool that they're building him up a little bit, see what you got. But bare minimum, the guy can obviously miss bats.
And we didn't even mention Brandon Young through this. The top arm here. 6 innings, 7 hits, all singles though, except there's 1 double, no runs, no earned runs, 1 walk, 3 strikeouts, topped out at 96. Yeah. Brandon Young was looking very Brandon Young-esque in his first start.
Yep. Average 94, touch 96, all around the zone with all of his pitches. Yeah. I think he's pretty much just waiting and ready for his major league debut at this point.
Exactly. And I'll go over the offense now. And Nick, I'll go back to you to start off, because I think you had a nice summary earlier, which is that if you look at the pure stat line for a lot of the top prospects that are in the Tides lineup, the results so far aren't pretty, but there's probably more than what meets the eye there.
Yeah, I mean, Jud Fabian is doing Jud Fabian things. Nothing's really changed there. But with Kobe Mayo and Samuel Basayo, obviously the 2 other the 2 top prospects in this lineup, Mayo was that Saturday or Sunday, he broke through and had 3 hits. A home run at 102 miles per hour, 113 mile an hour line out. That was the hardest hit ball in AAA. Orioles have had, in 2 of the first 3 days of the season, Samuel Basayo had 115.1 mile per hour line out on opening night. Mayo followed it up 2 days later with the hardest hit ball in AAA himself. But he had 3 hard hit balls in that game, and the 4th was at 94.9 miles per hour. So you can round that up and give him 4 hard hit balls as well. He's running a BABIP of 200 right now. He's hitting the ball extremely hard and making a ton of contact. He did strike out twice tonight, as I'm looking at the box score right now. But going into this, he was making a ton of contact and hitting the ball incredibly hard, just right at defenders. And kind of the same thing for Samuel Basayo, who is running a 125 BABIP. Same thing, hitting the ball incredibly hard. And the bigger thing with Samuel Basayo was, I don't see any injury concern there. Like, it's defensively, sure, keep him there. You're not going to see him behind the plate for a while. May not even see him at first base for a little bit, but just the bat, which is what I think is most important right now, keep that bat hot. He's performing well. He's hitting the ball hard without really any concern for the injury there. So those 2 guys, yeah, it's there. It's just not falling for them so far.
Yeah, I completely agree. If you're just scouting the stat line and you're just like, oh man, it sucks. Basayo and Mayo, the 2 guys got off to this slow start. But if you're watching the games, like Nick said, they're hitting the ball hard, they're making contact. I think Basayo had a great at bat where it was like double digit pitches in, and then he eventually strikes out. But even when they're making contact, they're hitting it hard. The BABIPs are low. It's less than a week into the season, so you just got to give it time for everything to equalize. And yeah, Fabian started out 0 for 9 and then comes out, hits a bomb, takes a walk, think he has a hit tonight, or he did have another hit. So Beavers is the one that's a little worrying to me. I think he's struck out like 70% of his plate appearances or close to it. So obviously, I mean, that's not sustainable for anyone, not even Joe Fabian. So yeah, that's going to come down. But again, it's Fabian and especially Beavers. It's like their first taste of AAA for the most part, other than a little bit last year. So yeah, it's not the exciting offense that we saw the last few years, but there's definitely some highlights in there. Vimal machine, the machine is still doing machine-like things in AAA, and Dylan Carlson got off to a good start. And hey, he was signed for depth, and he's up in the Orioles now once Kowser broke his finger.
I was just thinking back on last year. Samuel Basayo, as you guys might remember, had an injury flare up either in the offseason or in camp. That kind of a similar situation as this year. He didn't catch for the first month or so of the season. And his bat got off to a really slow start at Bowie. And I remember us having an episode a couple weeks into the season where we were talking about how Basayo was not walking. And that, if you're going to look for something that was a concern, that could be an issue. And I just went back and looked it up. Basayo did not draw a walk in the first 14 games last year at Bowie. He's already drawn 2 this season with Norfolk, including one that he picked up on Wednesday night. He's not really striking out at a rate that's, astronomical or bad. So the walk to strikeout numbers are there. He's hitting the ball hard. I think everything's going to be fine. And the home run that he hit on Saturday is the kind of home run you rarely ever see at Harbor Park. And Nick, I'm sure you have much better background on that than I do. But for a left-handed hitter to hit one out to the left field party deck in early season games, especially, has to be pretty rare.
I thought it was a pop-up, but it just kept traveling because he was able to muscle that thing into the picnic area, and it's like only Samuel Basayo is going to do that here in late March, early April. Yeah, that was a beautiful shot. Yeah, like I said, the injury's not a concern there, and it's clearly not affecting him mentally either. Like, yeah, I could see a guy like Basayo. We know how passionate he is, we'll say. I could see where he has this incredible spring training, and he knows he needs to work on the defense. They've been drilling him defensively, and now he's got to stop for a month, maybe more. And so I'm sure that's for a young kid like Basayo, who is passionate as he is, I'm sure that's taking a toll on him mentally, but he's not letting it affect him at the plate. And that's a good sign for me. Like, if we're a week into the AAA season, and if you're looking for small things to pick up on as big victories, I take that as a pretty big victory for Samuel Basayo.
And with that, now we will go into our final segment, which is, of course, Last Call, brought to you by Checker Spot Brewing, located at 1421 Ridgely Street. Checker Spot is not too far from Oriole Park at Camden Yards, making it a great place to have a pre or post game drink. And when you're at the game, you can get Bird is a Word, one of the Checker Spot's signature beers, from the concession stands at Camden Yards. Look for the Bird is a Word behind home plate whenever you go to Oriole Park at Camden Yards this season. As I mentioned, Checker Spot, located close enough to Camden Yards to be a good pregame and postgame destination. They are also open 7 days a week, so be sure to check them out. And in this final segment, I'm going to throw out this question here, which is that Gunnar Henderson, after an early season IL stint, all signs point to him coming back as soon as Thursday, which would be the minimum stint for him on the IL. Now, we're recording this before Thursday, so by the time you're listening to this, that news might have already broken. But let's say we see Henderson by Friday's series opener against the Royals. What are the chances that Henderson can mount a strong enough season with the remaining time he has left, assuming there are no other IL stints, to mount a case for American League MVP? So is this something for you guys to think about? I'll start with Bob on this.
I don't see why his odds should be limited much at all. I mean, he does not seem to be missing a beat down in AAA Norfolk. Obviously, it's not the same level of competition as in the major leagues, but a couple of home runs, like we talked about. That second one was just insane. 112 off the bat. 401 seemed a little further than that, but I mean, I guess telephone pole got in the way. But yeah, I think he's looked impressive. Made a diving catch tonight as we're recording this. So seems like the oblique is fine. I think he's going to be better than last year. Maybe you have to tick down the WAR a little bit just because of the missed time, but I still give him a good chance. I think he's going to go off and he's going to be extra motivated just because of the late start, to be honest with you.
He's not going to be able to win the MVP when you've got the new legendary superstar Andres Jimenez battling out up there north of the border in Toronto. I think he had another big night tonight, or maybe it was last night. I don't know, but Jesus Christ, man. No, Gunnar Henderson is going to change this lineup for the better when he returns. That's not a hot take, obviously. This Orioles offense is clicking for the most part. Yeah, they're stumbling a little bit, but they're having more often than not. This offense has been clicking, and now they still get to add a potential MVP candidate here in Gunnar Henderson. Hopefully, the rain came Wednesday night here before we started recording, and they did take Gunnar Henderson out of the game and replace him with TT Bowen. So maybe we're hoping that they said, go ahead and you're not going to wait out this rain delay and finish this game. Go ahead and get on the plane. And
Early
so
flight
you
to
can,
Baltimore.
yeah, so you can get to Baltimore for the afternoon game. We will see. But if not, he's going to be in the lineup on Friday. We know that for sure. So he missed a week. It's not that long. Gunnar Henderson, I do agree. We've talked about this a lot. There are areas of his game that he can improve on to make him a more impactful player, which is hard to believe. But he's still so incredibly young that we are going to see a better version of Gunnar Henderson this year, and he's showing it already. Like, yeah, he didn't get a spring training. He played, 2-3 games of spring training. He didn't have that, and yes, it's AAA pitching, but the bat's been pretty impressive so far. So I think he's going to pick up right where he left off here when he gets up to Baltimore, hopefully in a couple hours.
Yeah, I went back and looked this up. You don't have to go that far back into MVP history to find a player who won it over a relatively small sample size. Mike Trout played in just 134 games in 2019, which now feels like Mike Trout playing a full season, and won American League MVP. Trout, of course, was very good that year, had a 7.8 F WAR in that span. It was also maybe a relatively weak MVP field surrounding Trout. But that gives you an example of how a guy who didn't play on a team that went to the playoffs was able to win MVP despite missing more than 20 games, more than 25 games, actually. So when you look at Henderson's case, I stand by something that I said in one of our episodes, probably a mailbag a couple months ago, that I think if the Orioles win the division, Gunnar Henderson's going to win American League MVP. And now you would have the narrative built in that, well, look at the Orioles. They were only 3-3 or 3-4 or 4-3, whatever, when Henderson was out. And then all of a sudden they went on a tear and they won the American League East. Gunnar Henderson wins. That could very easily happen. I will say, though, that I think it's going to be a strong field again, especially if Aaron Judge is healthy. So I'm not counting on it. But if you thought coming into the year, or you predicted that coming into the season that Gunnar Henderson was going to win American League MVP, don't budge from that now.
Now is when you put the money on it because the odds are going to be a lot lower. Now is when you put the money on the Gunnar MVP bet.
And with that, that does it for this episode. We'll be back later this week to break down the break camp rosters for the Chesapeake Bay Sox, the Aberdeen Ironbirds, and the Delmarva Shorebirds. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, Blue Sky, and YouTube. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to our Patreon community and check out the perks that we have there for our paying subscribers, including bonus weekly episodes, monthly updates to our top 50, and much more. And in fact, if you subscribe to our podcast feed, even if you are not a patron, right now you can listen to a preview of the new weekly bonus show that we are going to do for patrons this season. Check that out on the podcast feed and then come over to Patreon so that you can get an episode just like that each week without ads from us. From Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network. Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to break down the break camp rosters for the Chesapeake Bay Sox, Aberdeen Ironbirds, and Delmarva Shorebirds before those teams begin their seasons on Friday. We're going to talk about who's on the rosters, some breakout players that you could see along the way, as well as some players who surprisingly are not included on these rosters for reasons that aren't immediately apparent to us. We may learn more as time goes on, and we'll wrap up the discussion on the players that you should watch out as deep sleepers on each team. But I know that this is a lot of things for us to process. And how are you guys getting geared up for this?
Friday's going to be a lot of channel surfing, channel flipping back and forth between these games, but I'm excited. I'm ready for this. Built for this.
Well, I got something that'll help you out because baseball is back in full swing, meaning we are back on the grind, making sure that we can provide coverage of prospects from AAA all the way down to the Dominican Summer League, and to make sure we have the energy and focus to pay attention to it all and put on this production each week. We are continuing our Magic Mind routine, and we want to share that experience with our listeners to let you know that Magic Mind is a mental performance shot that you can take with your morning coffee. It's not a coffee replacement. It's not the quick boost and crash like an energy drink, but a support for your body's natural energy engine. Created with a scientific advisory board of doctors and medical researchers, Magic Mind uses the highest possible grade matcha and organically grown mushrooms that provide safe and effective stress reduction, need a lot of that, and a sense of calmness. And also 5 cents of every bottle sold are used to support mental health charities that help U.S. homeless communities. And they're so confident in their product that they will refund you 100%. No questions asked for up to 100 days after buying if you are not satisfied. And all listeners do have a limited offer that you can use now that gets you 48% off your first subscription or 20% off a one-time purchase with code OTVLT20 at checkout. And you can claim it at www.magicmind.com/OTVLT20.
Certainly a lot for us to digest here tonight. And we'll just start off with Chesapeake Bay Sox. This club looks to be pretty talented from top to bottom, headlined by what has to be one of the fastest, most defensively steady outfields in the Orioles minor league system, as well as the possible breakout for year 2 of Year of the Pitcher here at Orioles on the Verge. And you've got a few guys that are repeating the level who might have had strong cases for going up to Norfolk, whether that's Alex Pham, Peter Van Loon, Keegan Gillies, and a few others. But then you also have some pitchers joining the team for the first time that bring an interesting mix and possible breakout potential. Zach Fruit, a guy that got a lot of hype in spring training for how he looked in his major league time in major league camp, and who's coming off a very strong 2024 season at Aberdeen, will make the jump up to AA this year, along with guys like Edgar Portes and Levi Wells. We'll also have Pat Riley for a full season in the Orioles farm system, and Juan Nunez, who is back with the Orioles after being selected by the Padres in last year's Rule 5 draft. We didn't get a chance to talk about this a lot last week, but Nunez was indeed sent back to the Orioles before the season started. And while I don't think the three of us have officially reorganized our list yet, it's safe to say this is probably a top 20, top 25 prospect returning to the system in Nunez. You also have a lot of people's favorite relief pitching breakout candidate this year, Yaki Rivera, and of course Trace Bright, who experience-wise is ready for AAA, but for right now with a little bit of logjam is back at AA. And the logjam is something that I think we're going to be talking about a lot on tonight's episode, but starting with this pitching staff. And Nick, I'll go to you first here. This does seem like a really deep group.
Yeah, we started noting this last season as the season progressed. Like, why are some lower level arms not being moved up? Why is Blake Money selling Delmarva, etc.? It's because of the pitching logjam that was really starting to form last year. It's now a full on traffic jam, and you can see it here in AA. Like, there are going to be arms in AA and below who probably should not be at their respective levels, but they're going to be there a while, I think, this year until trades happen, injuries happen, or guys who just clearly aren't going to cut it get filtered out. But innings are limited at each of these levels, and there are a lot of deserving arms. And if you look at this AA roster, Where am I at here? This roster. Wrong one. Alex Pham, Edgar Portes, Juan Nunez, Levi Wells, Pat Riley, Peter Van Loon, Preston Johnson, Ryan Long, Trace Bright, Zach Fruit. That's 10 right there. Daniel Lloyd can also give you innings. Pick a night where you want to go down to Bowie. You're not going to get one starter. You could potentially get 2 top 30, certainly 2 top 50 starting pitching prospects in this system going on the same night. Like it's going to be hard to move up in this system, I think. And you look at Chesapeake, this is a perfect example. Why? Like this is loaded. Alex Pham probably shouldn't be there. Keegan Gillis probably shouldn't be there. Dylan Hyde probably shouldn't be there. But how are they going to get the innings in AAA when you look at the AAA roster? So the pitching staff here on this Chesapeake roster is definitely the draw, and it's not going to leave you hanging to find some good pitching here.
The pitching is insane for the Bay Sox. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. You've got plenty of guys that, like Nick said, could already be in AAA at this point. Luckily, Cameron Weston was given that opportunity first, and I think deservingly so. But even as more guys like Pham and Nunez and whoever, Pat Riley, Trace Bright, you name them, when they do get the chance to move up, they're going to be replaced by guys in Aberdeen that are not going to make the Bowie rotation / piggyback, just pitching staff as a whole, any worse. So yeah, Bowie, it's no better place to highlight the pitching development going on in Birdland than in Bowie / Chesapeake right now. And yeah, that's what I'm tuning in to watch for every single night that there's a minor league ball. I'm checking out the pitching in Bowie at some point.
I know we talked about him a little bit recently when Steve Molesky was on the show, and we talked about Zach Fruit some as well because of how both of those guys looked in big league camp. But it looks like both of them are going to be in kind of those piggyback tandem roles, at least for the beginning of the season. What are you looking for out of those guys to see, like, okay, they are sustaining the breakouts that they showed in camp?
Strikeouts. Strikeouts are going to be a big thing. Fruit, you're not going to see these guys work 6-7 innings, unfortunately. That would be a lot of fun to watch Zach Fruit, see if he can go 6 innings, see if he can put up a couple quality starts. But unfortunately, this is just how it's going to go at pretty much AA and below. You're going to see a lot of these arms being piggyback like this, but make an impact in those 4 innings, right? Like Zach Fruit, especially, I think there is that cause for not concern, but just the thing to look out for that we've seen with so many arms beforehand. Remember, when a lot of these guys get to AA, there seems to be, and coaches have changed, so the philosophy may change. You're always evolving your pitching development, but the big decrease in strikeout rate actually we see with a lot of guys because there's this bigger emphasis to pound the strike zone. Your stuff has to play in the zone. You can't nibble around the edges anymore. These hitters are better. You're certainly not going to be able to do that in AAA or the major leagues. So you start to see these guys live in the strike zone more, and how well does the stuff play? And we saw it with Trace Bright early on last season. He was allowing way more hits, and the strikeouts were way down, but he felt good. Unfortunately, the second half of the season, the walk issue came back, and so we didn't see him take that step forward. But so like that, if you see somebody like Zach Fruit, if you see the strikeout rate dip down, and you're like, what's happening? Give it a couple of weeks, let him adjust. And then if you see that strikeout rate spike again after that in the second half of the season, those are the guys that I think then you really need to pay attention to as guys who are going to probably be successful at the next level.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much just, like you said, the strikeouts to walk ratio, especially Levi Wells, Zach Fruit at this point, after they showed out in spring training, and we know the stuff they're bringing to the table this year coming into the season. And those are 2 guys that you could have justified starting in Aberdeen, to be honest with you. But, well, maybe not Zach Fruit as much, but Levi Wells, I think you could justify starting in Aberdeen. But no, they're in Bowie to start, and I think they're going to be showcasing their stuff in a big way this year. And yeah, I think sky's the limit. And these guys were 2 guys that, they weren't super highly thought of coming into the year, but they've quickly gotten everyone's attention, and I expect that to continue.
Turning our attention to the position players on the Bay Sox roster, The outfield looks like the strength of this lineup. Enrique Bradfield Jr. headlining a group that includes Douglas Hodo III, as well as Tavian Josenberger and Reed Trimble. As I said a moment ago, they're going to cover a lot of ground in that outfield this season. But you look around the rest of the roster, and there are some interesting names here. Through three, this is a really solid group of catchers with Creed Willems seemingly in a good place offensively, perhaps ready to build on the results that he had in 2024. You have Adam Retzbach and Silas Ardway there as well. And then in the infield, Frederick Bencosme goes back to Bowie this year after an up and down, but overall solid 2024 season. And I think we're really hoping that a healthy Max Wagner can break out here. So, Bob, starting with you, what are your thoughts on the group of position players heading to Bowie/Chesapeake this season?
I don't think it's the most exciting group that we're going to talk about tonight. I would say it's probably the least, but it does have some big bright spots. I think Creed Willems is kind of riding under the radar a little bit coming into the year. I think he can continue to build on what he's done the last couple of years. I think the outfield is actually really exciting. Enrique Bradfield Jr., obviously, but Tavian Josenberger and Reed Trimble can kind of be a slightly lesser version of him. And Douglas Hodo has good defense. And let's not forget, had a WRC plus around 130 last year combined between all the levels he played at. So nothing to sneeze at. The infield is Frederick Bencosme and a bunch of guys that are trying to do something with their careers. Max Wagner, obviously, a little bit more upside there, but I'm hoping that Bencosme is able to put it all together a little bit more in 2025. But really, it's about the catchers and the outfielders is where my attention is on the position side.
It is the Enrique Bradfield Jr. show with this lineup. He is a star there, and we'll see how that hit tool plays. All the positive reports over the second half of last season. Let's see what he can do across hopefully a shorter time in AA this year. But Reed Trimble, we know the story with Reed Trimble. It's when he's on the field and healthy, just like last year, he was phenomenal. He's a very good prospect. He has multiple tools. He's got speed. He's got power. He can play in the dirt. He can play in the outfield. He can do a lot of different things. I almost wonder if you'd see him play some first base or something this year. I'm trying to figure out who plays first base for this team outside of the catcher seeing some first base time. But yeah, the outfield's going to be a lot of fun. You're not going to see a lot of fly balls get dropped out there at Chesapeake this year. In the infield, yeah, it's Servideo getting sent back to AA. Carter Young, I don't see a breakout happening with Carter Young this year. Bencosme is tough for me. I think I'm still holding out some hope there, just because he seems like an unbelievable person. When he was on the show, I loved that interview. But I just wasn't as impressed with the bat, to be honest, last year. And so I am a lot less optimistic about Bencosme entering the year, if I'm being honest. But Max Wagner, I'm still like, if I'm the only one watching him, so be it. I'm going to do it. I think he deserves one more shot, just because he had the hamate bone surgery that wiped out the entire offseason. He had the concussion as soon as he got to Bowie like 2 years ago. And then last year, he never got a chance to play last year because of back injury that ended up shutting him down. He showed the power when he was in Aberdeen. He showed a little bit there. I'm going to give him one more shot. I think Bencosme and Wagner, though, both these guys are well worth watching and paying attention to this year, and see if they can have a solid breakout and help improve this lineup.
And we'll go to Aberdeen now, and we'll stick with the position players. There's about as much ceiling as you could hope for in an outfield at the high A level right here with this group of Jake Cunningham, Vance Honeycutt, Austin O'Verne, and Thomas Sosa. All four of those players have their own unique question marks, but they all are very athletic, possibly high upside guys. The infield, good group here with Leandro Arias, Anderson De Los Santos, Aaron Estrada, Griff O'Farrell, and Jalen Vasquez. And then with the catchers, Ethan Anderson and Yudis Mordon and Ryan Stafford. I'm going to start with the infielders here because to kind of build off the discussion we had with Bowie. One of the players that I was really wondering if the Orioles were going to be aggressive with going into this season was Aaron Estrada, because it seemed like if they wanted to make the bump up to Double A after what he did at High A last year, they'd probably be justified in doing so. Yes, it's a pretty small sample size, 26 games, 98 plate appearances, but he finished that with a 99 WRC plus, 337 on base percentage, good walk to strikeout numbers. I would guess really the main thing is that we didn't see a ton of extra base hits there. So maybe you want to see a little bit more power at high A, but I feel like he could be a guy that moves up pretty quickly if he's able to get off to a good start this season.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I could see him just being in a mass promotion at some point, along with Vance Honeycutt, Austin Over, and Griff O'Farrell. I could see him be Ethan Anderson being in that mix that eventually hops up to Double A Bowie at some point, whether it's all at once or spread out a little bit. But yeah, I think he's got to be the leader in the pack as far as where he is compared to his age group than even Leandro Arias. Obviously, Anderson De Los Santos been a little bit disappointing, but we'll see what he can do if he's focusing on first base. Thomas Sosa, I think he's still the guy that's really raw, and he's got to prove that he can put it together. But Estrada's pretty polished already, so I would expect him fully to be in Bowie by the second half of this year.
This whole lineup this is the lineup that I'm most excited to watch of the three, just because there are a billion question marks about these guys. But this is where you're going to find some real breakout potential here, is with these Aberdeen bats. Like, is Ethan Anderson, he had some of the best swing decisions and batted ball data among his draft peers last year in that small first ace of pro ball. I'm excited to see how much he plays behind the plate. Although when you look at, Ryan Stafford being there, we know he plays every single position there is. I imagine you see a lot of Ethan Anderson behind the plate. So I'm curious to see if Ethan Anderson, like, that bat comes out hot, does the bat force the issue and get him a bump up to Double A a little bit sooner, or do they keep him back in Aberdeen a little bit longer because they really want to work on the defense? I'm curious to see that. But yeah, Leandro Arias and Aaron Estrada both had good years last year, and this is their next big test. Like, can Arias, that hit tool, carry him up to Double A? And Estrada, are we going to continue to see that power that he showed in Delmarva that I don't think any of us were expecting last year? And yeah, when you look at this outfield, like we talked about with Sosa, it just needs to click. He's shown the strength. It just hasn't resulted in over the fence home runs yet. He showed the speed. He showed the defense. He showed a cannon for an arm. When it clicks, it is going to click, and he's going to be a dangerous prospect in the system. And the same goes for Vance Honeycutt. Like, I still think his ceiling and potential get really underestimated because of all the focus on his weaknesses. Like, Honeycutt's ceiling is a 30-30 Gold Glove winning center fielder. And I don't think that's a stretch at all. And there is an extremely long journey for him to get there, but Honeycutt was one of the most explosive college hitters the last 10, 15, 20 years. So if I'm imagining a scenario here where it does click in 2 months, when it clicks for Honeycutt and Sosa, and those guys are batting 2-3 in this Aberdeen lineup, the opponents are going to be begging them to move the fences back in Bowie, because we know that's already a home run hitter's haven. When those two guys get up to Bowie, it's going to be a show. They got to start hitting. They got to start putting it together. But this Aberdeen lineup, yeah, if the pieces start clicking here, you're going to see some true breakouts.
Yeah, out of this position player group, I see like 8 or 9 potential major leaguers at some point in their careers. Obviously, it doesn't have to all be with the Orioles, but it's a stacked lineup, and it really just comes down first and foremost to those outfielders like Vance Honeycutt. We finally got some excitement out of him. We got to see him in action this spring training at the breakout game, and it was electric. Austin O'Vern, same thing. Like, these guys, I think, are going to lead the way to a really competitive. I know we don't think wins and losses matter in the minors, because they really don't. But I think this team's just going to end up winning a lot of games just because the talent on the field night in and night out is something to behold. And yeah, like I said, Thomas Sosa, he's raw, but let him cook, and he could be something pretty special.
If Honeycutt and Sosa click, this lineup is just going to be unfair most nights for their opponents. And I really think that O'Farrell, O'Vern, and Anderson are going to come in and settle in at high A quickly. All three of those guys looked good at Delmarva last year. They're college hitters, and they have kind of the right mix that you look for in guys who are going to succeed in this level. They're a good strike zone judgment, can take walks, don't strike out a ton. Anderson's probably the one with the most power in that group, but solid hit tools from O'Vernon and O'Farrell. I could see them taking some steps forward this year. Now let's go to the pitching staff. Just because we didn't start with this pitching staff doesn't mean that it's a weakness. In fact, this pitching staff is very good, highlighted by some pitchers who are going back to Aberdeen to begin this season in Michael Ferret, Trey Gibson, and Nestor Herman. And I think with Ferret and Gibson in particular, you could argue that the logjam of pitching in the system is coming into play for the fact that these guys are going back to high A. And they're joined by a group that spent most, if not all, of last year in Delmarva, in Braxton Bragg, Juan Rojas, Blake Money, Riley Cooper, among others, who look like they could be reasonable breakout candidates this year. And then Teddy Sharkey, who we thought was going to be one of the most immediate returns from the 2023 draft class last year. It didn't pan out that way because, unfortunately, an early season injury cost him most of 2024, but he'll go back to Aberdeen. Hopefully a healthy 2025 allows him to develop into an electric late-inning reliever that a lot of national outlets believe that he could be. So, and that kind of scratches the surface with this pitching staff, I think. But what are your guys' thoughts?
I think when you're going to have a rotation here of Nestor Herman, Trey Gibson, Michael Ferret as your top three in no particular order there, all three guys deserve to be in AA. So they're going to be a lot of fun to watch here in high. And then when you're going to be able to round out this rotation with Blake Money, probably Juan Rojas, maybe. We'll see if he continues to start. Maybe Braxton Bragg gets a start as well. This rotation, just like the lineup, I think this is where you're going to potentially see the real breakouts. Like if Nestor Herman, Gibson, and Ferret, if they had many breakouts last year, they put themselves on the radar. Now this is the year where do they take that next step? And I want to see which one of these guys, how many of them, just come out of the gates firing, where you're like, why the hell are they still in Aberdeen? They do not deserve to be there. They're overpowering hitters. It's not even fair. I hope at least one of those guys really starts the year in that manner. And in this bullpen, I think the bullpen is very sneakily, except for Teddy Sharkey, because everybody loves Teddy Sharkey. I think the bullpen is very sneakily pretty good. Zane Barnhart is a guy who the data looks really good on. Jared Beck, I don't think we ever talk about enough. He's always a guy where I'm like, yeah, the numbers suck. He can't throw strikes. He's too tall. If he reaches the majors, I think he would be the tallest pitcher ever, I believe. I can't remember, but either way, it's like, yeah, he's not that good. And then every time I go back and I look at his numbers, and I'm like, oh, he's been really, really good for like the last 2 months. So Beck is going to be super interesting. Riley Cooper, I think, should just be in AAA at this point. I don't know why he needs to be pitching against high A dudes, especially after that spring training he had. So yeah, that's the bullpen is honestly going to be, in my opinion, just as interesting as the rotation here in Aberdeen.
I was going to say, I feel like Riley Cooper really got some shine towards the end of spring training there. Very interested to see what his season looks like. But yeah, again, pitching. It's pretty spectacular. The starters are, I'm sure there will be some piggyback in Aberdeen as well between these guys. And Wyatt Cheney, I think he's missed some time with injury. What do we have here? Wander Los Santos, I think he kind of had a lost season last year. Is he able to bounce back? Ty Weatherly is a guy with great stuff, not always knowing where it's going. But yeah, Teddy Sharkey for me is like the highlight. Like, how quickly can he move up the system this year if they really want to let him loose? Or do they want to play it safe coming back from the injury and have a typical progression? But I feel like he's got the high octane stuff and the attitude where he could end the season in AAA Norfolk's bullpen. It would not be a shock.
I'm glad you guys mentioned Riley Cooper because for anyone had a chance to watch him in big league camp this spring, he looked really good. There was a very nice write-up by Andy Koska in the Baltimore Banner, giving a little bit more background on Cooper. And what's interesting is this was a guy who pitched primarily out of the bullpen at LSU. And last year, the Orioles used him in a hybrid role. Even when he was coming out of the bullpen, he was usually throwing 3+ innings in relief. And the numbers, if you look at what he did in Delmarva last year, he clearly held his own and was solid there, but nothing really jumps off the page. Yet, from watching him a little bit more this spring and from seeing a few of his outings at Delmarva last year, I'm left wondering, could he be one of those guys that you fast track as a reliever, especially if you decide to go the pure relief route where it's an inning or two at a time, as opposed to coming in the top of the fifth and pitching until the eighth or ninth inning? What do you guys think? Is that a possibility?
Potential. I mean, you never know. Like it sounded like after the draft that they signed Riley Cooper thinking that he had starter stuff, but just didn't have the opportunity because, I mean, even Blake Money got bumped from that rotation, especially when Paul Skeens came over to LSU. But like, I don't see Riley Cooper being a starter at any point anymore, although he did start last year with Delmarva. But I do think, especially after what he did in spring training, yeah, why not throw him in the late inning role here in Aberdeen and see if he can be in Bowie in 2 months and in AAA by the end of the year? Because the dude, like, if you read Andy Costco's articles about him, it was a really fun piece in that the dude's different. He's built different mentally. He has that reliever mentality where he's just going to go out and say, I'm better than you. I'm bigger. I'm stronger. And I'm just going to overpower you with my stuff. Here it is. Go hit it. And he was successful in spring. He was really good last year in Delmarva. So I honestly wasn't that high on him at all last year. But after watching what he did this spring, we'll see.
I feel like he could be a more likable Keegan Aiken type in the major leagues potentially. I mean, can either come in and get lefties out in one inning, or if you need someone to go 2 or 3, he could do that as well. I feel like that's where he's headed. But yeah, I'd love to see. I like to see anyone fast tracked. It's always exciting, and especially when you have so many guys that could potentially be starters down the line. You see it in Cleveland with the Guardians. I don't mind developing certain guys as relievers because that can work out and they can help your major league team sooner than you might expect.
We'll go down to Delmarva, and we're going to continue on with the theme of pitching here, because when you look at the Shorebirds break camp roster, what stands out the most is the pitching staff, which is headlined by one of the biggest, if not the biggest, breakout prospect from last season, Keeler Morphe. Morphe had a late season run with the Shorebirds. Young right-hander, showed some very impressive stuff. Even got an appearance in the Futures game this spring. And then there's also some other possible breakouts in this group, headlined by Iber Cartaya, a guy that we've talked about on here before. Cartaya started off his career with a couple of sluggish seasons in the short season minors, got to Delmarva last summer after a fairly solid run in the Florida Complex League, and showed really good stuff. He and Morphe could be headlining this rotation alongside of Chase Alsop, a pick out of Auburn in last year's draft. The national media in particular zeroed in on Alsop as having some really interesting stuff, in particular his fastball. I kind of expected, and I think that the two of you thought the same, that we might see Alsop begin this year in Aberdeen, but he's going to start the season in Delmarva. So I think when you look at this group, and we'll talk about the position players in a minute, but I think when you look at this group, the pitching staff is a clear highlight. And there's some possibly really high power arms among that mix.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I certainly thought that Alsop would be like the next Jackson Ballmeister and start the year in high A Aberdeen. But once you look at that roster, it's like, yeah, I could see where that could be a little bit of a crunch there, just like we've been talking about all night. It's just, especially on the pitching side, it's just there's too much. You have to wait your turn. And I don't think Alsop's going to be a guy like Blake Money that spends all season in Delmarva, but he'll be more along the Michael Ferret, Nestor Erman, Trey Gibson's, where second half he'll go up to Aberdeen and hopefully start next year in Bowie. But yeah, him, Keeler Morphe, obviously that's the guy we want to watch. He might have been a little too amped up for that breakout game as the youngest guy there as a pitcher, but he's exciting. Even when he's walking guys, he's exciting. But I can't wait to see him and how fast he can continue to develop during the season. Like you said, there's a lot of other guys, Echo Correa, Iber Cartaya, Brian Bautista, I think is kind of underrated. And for some reason, I'm thinking that Jacob Cravey, after a not so great debut season is going to come out and look a lot different, but we'll see what happens there. But yeah, the pitching, and this is where there's a lot of guys that we expected to see on the Delmarva roster on the pitching staff. Maybe they're ready, but they're just not going to be showing up opening day. Maybe they'll kind of creep their way in as the season goes on. But yeah, again, pitching is pretty great throughout the system.
Yeah, looking at this staff, I'm shocked at it's just weird to see this fleet of like undrafted free agents and not more of the 2024 draft picks here. It's like Joe Glassie, Christian Eberholtz, Kenny Liner, Trent Terzinski, and Ben Vespi were all UDFAs. And they're here in this Delmarva lineup. It's just interesting that we're missing so many 2024 draft arms. And it could be a matter of if there was a tweak and you miss 2 weeks of spring, like it's going to push you back 2 weeks. And like Bob said, you'll be back in 2 weeks and you'll be on the Delmarva roster. Maybe some guys get bumped up to Aberdeen. We'll see. But it is just interesting to see so many draft picks not here and so many UDFAs. But as far as like the rotation goes, you're going to see this Delmarva rotation of Chase Alsop, Keeler Morphe, Yiber Cartaya, Asel Correa, and Sebastian Gongora is a guy that I think we're going to be talking about a lot over the next couple of weeks because he was the 11th round pick out of Louisville, and the velo went down as the season progressed last year when he was at Louisville. But John Muley noted in an offseason chat, and actually I think he posted an article today too, looking at some of the minor league roster stuff. But he noted that Gongora is back up to 97 miles per hour from the left side. So I think that's going to be a really fun name to check out down in Delmarva.
Just a fun name to say as well.
And he's like 6'5". He's a 6'5" lefty who throws 97 miles per hour. Yeah, give me that, please.
Go now to the position players with the Shorebirds. Miguel Rodriguez, a catcher, is one of the highlights here. Rodriguez, a relatively new addition to our top 50 prospect list. A young hitter who seems fairly advanced for his age behind the plate, good power and good walk numbers. I also like Edwin Amparo a lot, who's coming up to full season ball for the first time in his career. In the FCL last year, Amparo showed a lot of power, and although he really did not walk a whole lot, he also rarely struck out. Limited defensive versatility, and there are some questions about where he's going to stick on the diamond, but for now, the 19-year-old shows a pretty interesting plate approach. Meanwhile, you're hoping that Brylan Tavera, who once had the record for the largest bonus of any player signed in the international free agent class by the Orioles, can bounce back after a 2024 season that was really marred by injuries. There's a few other players I think we're waiting to see if they can break out in that group or if they can do the most with this opportunity, as we're going to discuss in a moment. There's some players where we're kind of left scratching our heads where they are to start the season, and Delmarva's positional player slate is one of the areas that seems to have really been affected, along with the pitching staff. But when you look in this group, clearly does not have the headline names that the Ironbirds and Bay Sox have, but still some interesting players to keep an eye on in the early phases of the season.
Yeah, and if you're just counting numbers on the rosters, they're missing an outfielder. Like every roster has 3 catchers, 6 infielders, 16 pitchers, and 4 outfielders. Delmarva only 3 outfielders, so maybe they just don't know who's going to fill that spot come opening night. Hopefully it's Ellis Cuevas, who I'm like, where are you, Ellis Cuevas? But hopefully he's not injured or at least too badly. But yeah, I think that's correct. I think this is a roster that is just waiting for the FCL season to get underway and kind of over with so they can, in the second half, bring on all the hotshot prospects out of the FCL, like the Steven Martinez's, the Jordan Sanchez, the why can't I remember any of the international guys' names? Emilio Sanchez of the world, all those guys over. So yeah, I think it's Delmarva is always a balancing act between getting guys their first full season ball and also just like ready to take on the next class as well. So it'll be interesting to see how this roster fluctuates throughout the season for sure.
As far as the hitters go, it is a roster. It is a group of names. I think every year we've done this episode, I feel like we always like, all right, what's the level like when you tune in? Because I don't know how you guys do it, but most nights I feel like this will be a lot less this year with the kids getting older. But typically, you put Orioles up on the big TV, and I've got the iPad or the laptop, and I've got a minor league game on, and I'll watch one live typically. And every year I feel like we've done this show, it's always been like it's Delmarva that I'm watching live that night. I'll catch up on the other stuff, the next morning when I get to work, um, after I get my work done. But like it's with Delmarva is always because this is where, yes, it's tough some nights to watch, especially since the elimination of short season ball, guys are getting more aggressively pushed here to this level. Some nights it can be extremely tough to watch. Some people, a lot of it's high school baseball. Not quite, but it can be as bad. But this is where it's like when you're watching on a nightly basis, it's really good. It's my favorite mental exercise to sit here and watch like, okay, who are the real guys? Who is really standing out as true prospects? Picking those guys out, hyping them up, and seeing if we're right. And I love it when we're able to identify these guys early on in Delmarva, hype them up, and then they finally break out, and we're like, "Told you, this is a dude." Um, this is the first year though where I'm like, I'll catch Delmarva tomorrow. If I'm being honest, outside the pitching is going to be a lot of fun, but this lineup is, Miguel Rodriguez is going to hit. He is a fun hitting catcher. Edwin Amparo is a top 50 prospect in our system. I don't know where he's ranked. I think he was like top 35 or so. I had it. I lost it. He's pretty high up our top 50 list. He's going to be a lot of fun. There is an outfielder that I see Zach has noted that will be fun to talk about in a moment. But Kevin Guerrero, is weird to see his name. He was not good though last year. The Tanner Scott Cole Sulser trade lives on. Yeah, I don't know. Are you guys excited about Michael Hernandez? Like
No,
genuinely?
nope. I mean, he did have a great final month of the season last year, so hopefully he can build off it. But excited, I would not say so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I'm going to be watching a lot of the first 3 to 5 innings of Delmarva games and then flipping over to something else. Because yeah, I mean, these starting pitchers, I want to see them, and yeah, I want to see at least some of these guys how they look in full season ball on the screen. But other than that, yeah, I think between Aberdeen and Bowie mostly is where I'm going to be focusing. Yep.
Yeah, an error there in my notes. That was Edwin Amparo, not Felix Amparo on Delmarva's roster. And Amparo, much different profile, a little bit higher rated prospect. Both guys that you should have your eye on, even though Felix Amparo is not going to start this season in Delmarva. Now, let's take a minute to talk about some of the players that aren't on the roster. And just worth noting that we are recording this on Wednesday night. We don't have any more information than what most Orioles fans have right now. We may learn more before the games start up on Friday, but there are some guys missing. We already touched on Ellis Cuevas. Luis De Leon is another notable name who we saw a little bit of in big league camp this year, as well as in the breakout game. He is not on a break camp roster. Carson Dorsey and Christian Rodriguez, among some of the more intriguing arms from the 2024 class, are not on a break camp roster. And Nick, I know you sort of alluded to that a moment ago, that Delmarva's pitching staff has a lot of undrafted free agents in it, as opposed to drafted pitchers from last year's class, even though that was a fairly deep group. So I know that we don't know why that is the case right now, but it's clear that we could see some changes if some of these players hopefully come off or get their season started soon.
Yeah, you're looking at 6 here. I'm looking at shout out to Yoni in the Patreon chat who put together the full list. I started to do this. I had like 4 names. I'm like, oh, this is cool. All right, well, these guys will probably be in Delmarva soon enough. All right, let's roll with this episode. And here comes Yoni with like 20 names. Like, oh, okay. Yeah, I missed a lot here. We're looking at 6 drafted pitchers not on a full season roster. Carson Dorsey, like he made an appearance at High A last year. So interested to see. And again, like Zach said, we don't know. It could be, if you have the smallest tweak and you're set back a week, well, they're going to keep you in Sarasota for another week. These are just break camp rosters. They will change. Minor league rosters are very fluid. But yeah, Carter Baumler, not on a roster. maybe injured again already. Reece Sharp recovering from Tommy John surgery. You should probably see him later on in the year. Davy Cruz, a name that I know we were excited about in years past, but just he keeps walking way too many guys. It's interesting. Luis De Leon is the big one though, and that one it's like when I'm putting my top 50 list together back in December, it was like it was hard to get excited about Luis De Leon. I'm like, the stuff is still there. You got to rank him higher, but I kept wanting to knock him down some pegs unfairly. Shouldn't have, because he comes out in that spring breakout game like that's the Luis De Leon that we all fell in love with, 2 years ago. And not that he was bad last year, he just didn't take that step forward. And to see him, it was 6-7 pitches, couple ground ball outs, strikeout. You saw the velo, you saw the slider. That's Luis De Leon. But we haven't heard anything since, and now he's not on a full camp roster. That is concerning as well. Hopefully, it's nothing major and it was just a small setback. But yeah, we'll see. It'd be nice to get some more information about some of these guys. And I feel like we're very lucky with like the full season injury list that came out like 2 weeks ago. We're like, all right, you're feeling really good. And now it's like, are we feeling that good still when you're seeing these names not on these minor league rosters? But hopefully nothing too serious.
And for that, now we'll dive into the deep sleepers. And this is, of course, part of our last segment, was this last call brought to you by Checker Spot Brewing, located at 1421 Ridgely Street, not far from Camden Yards. Checker Spot is the perfect place for a pre or post game drink. And while you're at the game, check out the Burtis Award, one of their signature beers, available behind home plate at Oriole Park at Camden Yards this season. Checker Spot Brewing is open 7 days a week. You're going to want to check it out anytime you come to an Orioles game this season. And now we will get into our final segment. And usually during the season, this is where we highlight players outside the top 30% of our top 50. But since we're really not fully into the minor league season just yet, we decided to take a different approach this week and discuss some of the players that we think profile as deep sleepers on each roster. We each went through Chesapeake, Aberdeen's, and Delmarva's rosters and picked one player from each club that we think you should have your eye on this season, even if they're not the biggest name on their roster or among the biggest names. And we'll start off with Bob, who I think from top to bottom has a pretty interesting mix.
Yeah, I went with Douglas Hodo for my AA sleeper. I'm not sure if he's that deep of a sleeper, but like I said, he had a 128 WRC plus last season, over 420 plate appearances between low A, high A, and double A, and in 50 plate appearances in double A, he had a 121 WRC plus, had a pretty solid stint in the Arizona Fall League, can play some good defense at all three positions. So I like him a lot. Daniel Lloyd was kind of my backup there if Douglas Hodo was too obvious of a pick. But yeah, I just think Daniel Lloyd was a guy that Matt Blood singled out a year or two ago, and then he dealt with some injuries. So maybe if he's healthy, maybe he can put it together. In Aberdeen, I went with Ty Weatherly because I feel like he's a guy that has the Orioles love. He has great stuff, not always great command of it, but he's also dealt with some injuries here and there. He has not pitched that often. He was an undrafted free agent after the 2023 draft, and then he in 2023 got in 11 and 2/3 innings to a 2.31 ERA, 3.24 FIP, and then last year in low A he pitched in 35 and 2/3 innings, had a 2.02 ERA, 2.85 FIP, struck out 34.3% of batters. I just think that's a pretty good recipe for the Orioles pitching development to work on. So don't be surprised if Ty Weatherly kind of pops a little bit this year. And Delmarva was a little bit tougher because, like we talked about, a lot of undrafted guys from the last year and some not as highly regarded international guys. But I went with Idri Campos, who is an infielder. He's played second base, third base, shortstop, a little bit of outfield over the past season or two. He was a January 2022 amateur free agent. He's still only 19 years old, turns 20 next month, but he's had right around a league average bat last season, at least in the FCL, and then had a little bit of time in low A Delmarva. But he batted .262 with the 758 OPS in the FCL. He only struck out less than 12% of the time. So he's a guy that we've talked about this before. What you want to see from these guys is less swing and miss, more contact, less chase. Well, his swinging strike percentage went from 31.7 in 2023 all the way down to 12.7 in 2024. His contact rate went from 54% to 77%. So again, a guy who, as he got a little bit older, swung less, missed less, and I think that's a pretty good recipe.
Like I'm going to start with AA. Every single time in my mind, Bowie comes out, but Chesapeake. It's hard to pick a deep sleeper here with this AA roster because I mean it's dudes we know and a lot of veterans, and there are no sleepers on that rotation. But I'm just gonna say Levi Wells just because we talked about him a lot this offseason, written about him a lot over on Substack. Just to see him only get 60 or so innings in high A last year, and that was with him missing 5 weeks with the shoulder injury, 5+ weeks with the shoulder injury. And he's got the 6.71 ERA. And you're like, why is this guy getting promoted to AA? It was a 3.78 xFIP to go along with that. The strikeout rate he was more than 11 strikeouts per 9. The walk rate, compare the walk rate pre-injury to post-injuries we've done before, is very good. The stuff is electric. Some of the top stuff plus numbers among his age group in all the minor leagues last year. Levi Wells, for the Orioles to promote him to AA, I think speaks volumes about what they think about him. So I love that move. It's one of my favorite assignments. With high A Aberdeen, I'm going to go with I changed it up here. I'm going to go a pitcher, Dominic Freeberger, only because I'm interested to see what he's going to do this year. He was also an undrafted free agent like 2 years ago. Out of UConn, he was the Big East Player of the Year as a third baseman at UConn. The Orioles signed him as a pitcher. This is a Jordy Henry guy. Orioles minor league pitching coach Jordy Henry, they work out together in the offseason. They train extensively together. So Dominic Freeberger has a lot of support here in the organization. He is from Baltimore, so he's a local kid. I don't know what high school they went to. I don't know the high schools up there to shout them out and get some extra praise there from other alumnus of those schools. But he was electric when he debuted with Delmarva and only pitched like 3 innings, and then they moved up to high A, and then he got hurt and missed the rest of the year. But he's healthy. So, and in high A, see what stuff looks like. Excited to watch it. And then for Delmarva, I'm going to guess at this last name. I believe it's Aiken. I believe I've heard someone say Aiken. Cohen Aiken, a right-handed pitcher. He was a 14th round draft pick last year out of Lindsey Wilson College. And if you're asking, what is that? That is not a make-believe school. It is an NAIA school in Kentucky. So not D1, not D2, not D3. This is NAIA. He averaged more than 11 strikeouts per 9 in his 4 years there with just 2.6 walks per 9. So fantastic numbers regardless of the level. But then he pitched in the North Woods League last summer. So a big step up in competition facing D1 guys. 40 innings, 52 strikeouts, 9 walks. Yeah, he's also Canadian. So this is a Canadian kid from an NAIA school with massive strikeout numbers, got a $25,000 signing bonus, 6'2", big guy. I'm excited to watch him pitch. And apparently when he was in North Woods League, he was up to 94 at the fastball, mid-80 slider, a sinker, and a changeup. We'll see what this Aiken does.
So I just looked it up, and for future reference, Dominic Freeberger went to Calvert Hall for high school. So I'm sure that we have a fair number of Calvert Hall alums among our listeners. I'll go ahead and start with my deep sleeper at Bowie, and that is Preston Johnson. Johnson was drafted by the Orioles out of Mississippi State as part of their 2022 draft class in the 7th round and had 1 professional appearance, which came right after the draft in the FCL, and then missed all of 2023 after undergoing Tommy John surgery. He returned in 2024 and did not get off to a great start. In fact, his first 2 months last year at Aberdeen were pretty bad. But from the beginning of June on, he really picked up his performance and put up good numbers along the way. 1.98 ERA in 27 and a third innings pitched in that span with 39 strikeouts against 14 walks. The overall stat line, owing in part to the rough start to the season as well as his high walk rate, didn't necessarily look great at Aberdeen, but nonetheless, he gets to bump up the Bowie. He was one of those guys that in college where it looked like the stuff was much better than the results. And I'll be curious to see what he does with the Bay Sox this year now that he's further removed from the injury, because he seems like the kind of guy that could really break out. And if you want to look at another pitcher who could break out after coming off an injury, that's Wyatt Cheney, who the Orioles took in the 10th round of the 2022 draft out of junior college. Cheney had originally been at Oklahoma State, but then transferred to a junior college, Liberty Hill University, or Liberty Hill, the college. Transferred there, put up a very good season, got drafted in the 10th round by the Orioles. And what was known at the time, 95 mile per hour fastball, good strikeout numbers. This is 122 strikeouts, were the eighth most among pitchers in NJCAA schools that season. We did see him in Delmarva in 2023, and the results weren't great. Unfortunately, he missed all of last year because of an injury, but the Orioles must like the way that things are going in his rehab. They're going to bump him up to Aberdeen. This is a guy who was reportedly throwing 95 before the injury, so keep an eye out to see what he does. And then for my hitter, I went with another guy coming back from a series of injuries, and that's outfielder Raylan Ramos at Delmarva. Ramos made his professional debut back in 2022 and put up very solid numbers as a 17-year-old in a Dominican Summer League, posting a 109 WRC plus with 2 homers and an 8.3% walk rate in 47 games. He went to the FCL the following year, which was the first of 2 injury-shortened seasons. In fact, he's appeared in just 28 games over the last 2 years down in the FCL combined. So this could very well be a situation where Ramos is in Delmarva until someone else is ready to go, and then maybe he goes back to the FCL to start this season. But if that happens, I don't necessarily see that as a disappointment, because this is a player who's still young. He's only 20 years old, doesn't have a lot of experience in the FCL, and to be able to make the jump from the DSL to Delmarva with minimal FCL time is going to be a tough task for any player, especially when you miss as much time as he has with injuries. But when he's been healthy, he's shown a little bit of power, some possible breakout potential in that bat. And even if that scenario happens where he starts the year in Delmarva and then gets sent back to the FCL after a few weeks, I wouldn't be surprised if we see him in low A before the season ends.
Yeah, I like Ramos a lot. Yeah, he's a guy that looked great after his first season and then missed mostly last year with injuries. So very curious to see what he's got, and it's pretty good confidence boost that they're putting him all the way up to Delmarva to begin the year.
Yeah, I wrote an article in Substack after Bob did his minor league roster prediction piece. I went through that and was like, all right, well, who are my deep sleepers based on the prediction rosters? And I had Raylan Ramos, just because he got a $200,000 signing bonus. He's a tall, athletic outfielder, and I know I saw what the injury was at some point. I feel like it might have been from the former Sarasota correspondent, so take that with a grain of salt. But I feel like it was like a broken leg or something that caused him to miss a big chunk of time. Maybe something else, but it was like we'll use a hockey term and just say lower body injury, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, pretty stoked to see Raylan Ramos this year.
And with that, that does it for this week. So we will be back next week to break down the opening weekend of the full slate of minor league baseball and the latest news in Birdland as well. You're not going to want to miss that. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, YouTube, and Blue Sky. We're also over at Substack, Orioles on the Verge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to our Patreon community and sign up to become a paying member today. For as little as $3 a month, you will have access to bonus weekly shows from Bob, Nick, and myself, as well as monthly updates to our top 50 prospects list. And as a reminder, in case you've not had a chance to listen to it yet, you actually can listen to that first weekly episode as a preview on our main podcast feed. That's a taste of what patrons are going to get throughout the season, and their episodes will be ad-free. So you check that out this week. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network.